Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another pre-recorded lesson video. Hopefully, you are going back and watching the previous ones because we have not had a lot of people attending the live virtual classes. So what I'm going to start doing is just uploading the videos way ahead of time so that y'all can at least keep up. And make sure that you are at least watching the chapter readings as well, because I know quite a few of you don't have the book, and I can't find the book online. So the only way you're going to be able to read the book is either you come up to the school to pick up a physical copy, or you watch the videos I upload into the folder of the assigned chapter reading. The chapter reading videos aren't that bad. I think they're in between like 15 to 18 minutes long. And while that may seem bad, you can have it on in the background and while you're doing something else if you want to, just as long as you are at least keeping up a little bit, right? So let's review what happened in the first chapter. So what is essentially happening in the book so far is we get introduced to a girl named Claudette Colvin. She's living in the 1950s. This is a nonfiction book, so she is a real person. She is alive today. So we get introduced into the times that she's living in, the city, which is Montgomery, Alabama. And she's living in the time of segregation and the Jim Crow laws, right? So back then in the South, there was a lot of racial tension and hatred. And people of color, specifically Black Americans, did not have the same treatment as white Americans, right? They couldn't drink from the same water fountains, go to the same movies, go to the same parks, or even go to the same schools. And we see just how divided things were in that time. And we're sort of focusing more on the buses, right? And how divided it was even on public transportation like buses, and the conflict that Claudette Colvin has to face, which is giving up her seat, and she refuses to do so, right? She takes a stand against injustice and takes a stand for what she believes is right. And this sparks the civil rights movement, okay? This is a great book. I think y'all will relate to it well because she is around your age. She is 15 years old, and she decides to make a change in the world. And I believe anybody in the world can make a change just as long as they take that first step, right? So please go ahead and watch that chapter 1 reading because we are getting into chapter 2 today. And again, if you ever have any questions, just let me know, okay? But let's get started with lesson 3. Is what does a deeper exploration of segregation reveal? Remember, segregation is the legal separation of people or communities based on race. And the focusing question still is what motivated Claudette Colvin? What motivated her to make a change? The goal is we're going to be able to analyze the impact of segregation on Claudette's community through synthesizing information from sources in multiple mediums. Okay, so chapter 2, again, I am uploading the video of the chapter reading in today's folder, which is 329. And there is also, I don't know why it's not uploading, but there is also a video in the PowerPoint as well if you just want to look at the PowerPoint. Okay. But chapter 2 is essentially about Claudette Colvin and her early life, her childhood. We get more information about her family. She was raised really by her uncle and her aunt, and she considers them to be her mom and dad. She does have a younger sister, Delphine, and something. Delphine sort of has a tragic life. She does end up dying on Claudette's 13th birthday to polio, right? And then we get to see Claudette, what she thinks of her neighborhood, her community. She loves her community, but her community is known as sort of a rough part of town. And we get to see what Claudette likes to do in her free time, essentially. She loves studying, she loves working, and we sort of get to see that Claudette really is a pretty great person, right? And then we do get to see some of the racial divide further. Like whenever Claudette goes into stores and things like that, she's not allowed to try on clothes. to buy shoes. Her mother had to trace her feet on a brown paper bag and bring that into the store to find the right shoes for them to buy. So it was a lot of racial hatred. Claudette couldn't even go into the parks without getting run off. And in the schools, their schools weren't great because that was also segregated. At Claudette's school, her elementary school, there was only one teacher, there's only one room, and that one teacher taught every single grade, first through sixth, right? No matter how great the teacher is, that's always a tough thing to do, to teach 6 grades, right? And have all the students in one class. So hopefully, as you're listening to the reading or you're reading it yourself, you sort of see how tough life was back then, but just how strong Claudette really is and how positive she is as a person. So moving on, I do want to focus on a poem that I think will help your understanding of Claudette and what she thinks about her community. This poem is by Nikki Giovanni. If y'all paid attention to the first 9 weeks when we were doing the crossover, y'all know this name quite a bit. Nikki Giovanni is she is a writer. She writes a lot of poems. She is fantastic. And this poem's name is Nikki Rosa. I just want to focus on a couple of lines. These lines are, they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. This line is essentially just saying, yes, from the outside looking in, people think I live in a bad part of town. People think I had a tough childhood. But they'll never understand that if you look closer, I was happy. The people around me were great. We were a family. We were a community. Everyone had each other's back. And I got to just live my life as a child and have a great time. And that's essentially what Claudette is saying in chapter 2 as well, is that, yes, people think I live in a rough part of town, right? But she loved it, okay? She absolutely loved what she was doing. So yeah, that's essentially what this poem is really saying. Is it's relating to Claudette's life and how people think that she had a rough childhood and that the community she was in was a bad community, but it was family. It was a community. Everyone had each other's back. Everyone there was happy, right? They may not have had a lot, but at least they had each other, okay? And then also I want y'all to focus on page 14. More importantly, the second paragraph. It's, I knew plenty of white people, and they knew me. You had to be very careful around them. They never called the adults Mr. or Miss or Mrs. They used their first names instead. Or sometimes they made up little nicknames to dominate us. I was Coot. A doctor gave that name to me when I was little to distract me from the shot he was about to give. He sang, oh, she's the cutest little thing, but it came out Coot, and that name stuck. So Coot had a nickname, or Claudette had a nickname Coot given to her by a white doctor. And she's basically saying, I have to be careful around the white people in my life. And if I slipped up or disrespected them in any way, it could mean something bad could happen, right? And this is very close to what happens in the first paragraph of the book, where she's basically telling a story about a time in her childhood when she was 4, and she was playing around with some white kids, and she ended up getting in trouble for something that she didn't even do, right? What is essentially happening in this paragraph is, again, she's saying that I had to be careful around white people, right? I had to be careful around white people in my life. If I messed up or disrespected them, I'd get in trouble for it. Something bad would happen, but they never showed us the same amount of respect. She's basically saying white people didn't respect the people around them, but we had to respect them, right? Sometimes they would even learn to call us by our names. They would give us nicknames because they didn't see us as human, right? So she's basically giving an example of that. And she hated her nickname, right, Coop, because she thinks her name and everyone's name is your own personal identity, right? It's what makes you you. Your name is unique to you as a person. So she thinks by white people not calling her by her name and giving her a nickname, they're basically saying you're not human, right? And they're trying to use those ways to dominate Claudette during those times. Hopefully that makes sense. So I want y'all to think, what have you learned about segregation from reading Claudette's stories of her experience? Maybe some of y'all have already heard of the word segregation and how tough it was during those times. I want y'all to really focus on how reading this book has really changed your perception of segregation. For me, whenever I was first learning about segregation, it was very eye-opening, right? Because you have to think, the 1950s really wasn't that long ago. It was around 60 years ago. A lot of y'all's maybe grandparents lived through those times. My parents were born during those times. So everyone has someone in their life that could probably tell a story about segregation. And it should be very eye-opening how tough it was back then, and how people lived, and how people had to struggle and fight, right? So this is sort of a short lesson. I do want to get into a research question, because I don't think we did this last time. You all are going to be writing a research essay at the end of this 9 weeks. Y'all are going to be choosing a person in history during the civil rights and sort of answering a question about them that you come up with yourself. So a good research question is, how did segregation affect teens in the 1950s? Right? If you were the author of this book, if you were Philip Hoos, and you need to write a book about segregation and the Jim Crow laws during the 1950s and Claudette Colvin, you have to basically be able to answer a couple of questions yourself, right? You need to find the answers to these questions to be able to write a very accurate and detailed book about segregation. And one of the questions that you probably had to answer was, how did segregation affect teens in the 1950s? A research question has to be broad. It has to be pretty general. So you can't just find an answer immediately. If you Google it, you have to do some research on it. You have to spend some time actually becoming an expert on this topic. If you Googled this question, you couldn't find the answer immediately. You would have to do some research, right? Take some time to be able to find the answer to this question. But while a research question can't be too specific, the wording can be. So you can choose a couple of the words in this sentence to make it a little bit more specific, but not too specific. And I'll give you an example. So what I did was I took the word segregation teens in the 1950s, and I decided to fine-tune it, turn it a little bit more specific. So while the question is still broad, I am targeting a little bit more of a targeted demographic. So I did, how did segregation in schools affect Black teens during the time of Jim Crow? So instead of saying the 1950s, I really just wanted to focus specifically on the time of Jim Crow. Instead of just saying segregation, which is a very broad term, I said segregation in schools. And instead of saying all teens, I specifically targeted Black teens, right? So now whenever I have to answer this research question, I can focus primarily on segregation in schools affecting Black teens, right? Instead of just segregation affecting all teens. So while the question is still broad and general, it's a little bit more specific than the above question. Hopefully that is making sense. We are going to be working on research questions ourselves soon, but just keep this in mind in the back of your head as we keep going throughout the lessons. So what are some ways you can make this question more specific yourself? Some examples, if I didn't do it for you, maybe you could do, how did segregation on buses affect white teens, Black teens, in like 1955? Maybe choose a more specific year, if that makes sense. Again, this was a really short lesson. I do just want y'all to really focus on chapter 2 and Claudette's backstory. I may upload a discussion assignment. Keep a lookout for that. But again, pay attention to the other previous lesson videos and the chapter reading videos. And if you have any questions, email me or message me on Schoology. I do respond pretty quick. But other than that, that is it for this video, and I'll see you here for the next one. Bye.